Good evening.
Oh my word.
Good evening. I'm Paul Kahn from the Royal Hong Kong Yacht Club Big Boats Committee. We're going to be starting a monthly seminar series to address common issues important to big boat owners. And the first up tonight is insurance. And with the massive fire in Aberdeen this past weekend, insurance would already be on everyone's mind. With rising premiums, decreasing cover, and tighter controls, we have two experts to help us understand where the market is today. On my left is Bob Bart. He is a professional surveyor and Hong Kong registered engineer with over 40 years experience, currently with the Brooksfeld Group, a leading international marine consultancy group. And on my right, I have Colin Dawson, who is specializing in, who is a specialized yacht insurance broker with over 30 years experience and currently working in conjunction with Expat Marine for over a decade. And with that, I think I'm going to let each of them give an overview of where the market is. And then we're going to have a little bit of questions to each of them, and then we'll open it up to Q&A.
Good evening. As Paul kindly introduced me, I think most people here know who I am anyway. I think it's particularly timely that we've got this talk this evening, largely because of the fires in Aberdeen recently, and risk and difficulties on everyone's minds. But also the way the insurance market's changed a lot in the last 2 to 3 years. For 20 years, premiums went down and down and down and down, and cover got wider and wider and wider. New underwriters came into the market. It was a race to the bottom. And then all of a sudden, the Lloyd's market realized it was losing a ton of money and decided something needed to be done about it. So they put the halt on underwriters just sort of having an open season, and they actually started to say, look, if you're going to underwrite risks under the Lloyd's banner, you've got to comply with our rules and regulations. We saw a lot of underwriters exit the market straight away, and then over a period of 6 months, things began to change. The company market followed suit, and over the last 2 years, we've seen premiums go up 50, 60, 70%, I would say, from where they were 3 or 4 years ago. Excesses or deductibles have probably doubled or tripled, and we've got new excesses, deductibles come into play. I would say that premiums are still probably 2/3 of where they were 20 years ago. While we see fewer numbers of claims, the costs of those claims go up. I've just this morning seen the Hong Kong insurance industry figures for the first quarter of this year. The claims outstrip the fire in Aberdeen will outstrip the entire premium received from the marine industry in Hong Kong. That's commercial shipping and yachts, and that's just one set of claims. So it's very evident that the claims are happening still, and it really comes down to a combination of underwriters needing to tighten up. The regulators, such as the Marine Department, need to tighten up on safety. They need to tighten up on illegal boats, illegal moorings, particularly illegal moorings, things like electric cables that are going out to boats that are not legal. And also owners need to start looking much more carefully at their maintenance programs and how they're prepared to put money into the maintenance of their boats to prevent such losses. For years, the insurance industry has been in a place where it responds to a problem. And I think the way we need to look at it going forwards is not just responding to a problem, but working with clients to help prevent a problem happen in the first place. And that's going to involve much more responsibility from the boat owner, and it's going to involve much more flexibility from the insurance industry. This is something that I'm bringing into play, talking with the various underwriters in the market. And I have to say, so far, unfortunately, it's not getting that much traction, even though it's total common sense. Insurance has always been a reactionary process. You pay your premium, and then you hopefully get help when you have a claim. It's very, very true that the cheaper insurance provided by people who don't know what they're talking about generally doesn't react in the way that an owner of a boat wants it to. That's not to say the most expensive insurance does that, but it's far more likely you're going to get a much more responsive answer from your insurer when you have a problem. It makes sense to use a broker who knows what a yacht is, And it makes sense to have that broker use an underwriter who also knows what a yacht is. So if your rig comes down, for example, I can talk to an underwriter. I know what a forestay is, and I'm talking to an underwriter who also knows what a forestay is, and therefore that saves an awful lot of difficulties. We're in a market, unfortunately, in Asia that is predominantly tick box people doing insurance, which is very difficult, and so it means they'll underwrite the risk if you fulfill a set of criteria. Underwriters are being squeezed by their superiors and their shareholders a lot more than they've ever been before. They're turning around and saying we just simply don't want these risks anymore. So we're seeing risks such as racing risks are really coming under scrutiny. Underwriters are really walking away from racing risks offshore. We're seeing underwriters wanting to do yachts that are much more local rather than crossing overseas. We're seeing local underwriters wanting to do local risks rather than a Hong Kong underwriter being able to underwrite a risk in Thailand or Singapore. The direction the insurance market is going, unfortunately, is not positive. And certainly the fires in Aberdeen the other week haven't helped that. And I think every yacht owner in Hong Kong can expect to see the effects of those fires on their insurance policies when they're being renewed from now on. And I think certainly when you see the figures of premium versus paid claims to clients, when you see those figures, any businessman will wonder why on earth the insurers are still doing this business at all, which is not what a yacht owner wants to hear, of course. But it does mean everybody's got to work together as a team to try and make sure that everyone can get the insurance cover they want. And that does mean a bit of flexibility from everybody. So the insurance market's in a very, very different place from where it was 5 years ago, that's for sure. And to be quite frank, I think we're going to see that continuing to change going forwards. I think we're going to see the premium increases continue. I think we're going to see the cover shrinkage continue. I'm not sure we're going to see the increases in excesses continue the way they've been going. I think they're probably where they should be. But certainly owners need to be prepared to pay higher premiums for the risks that they're asking insurers to cover. The most common aspect of what we see is your premium's too expensive, I'm going somewhere else, or you ask too many questions, you're too difficult, I'm going to somebody who makes my life easier. And there's 2 points on that. Number one, I would hope that people understand that any questions I ask is really to try and help them get a policy that responds properly. And it's not that people want to be difficult at the outset, but if you get the difficulties out of the way before you have a claim, the likelihood is the problems won't arise when you do have a claim. In terms of cost of insurance, a cruising yacht that's not a super yacht is likely to cost 4 to 5% of your annual operating costs. Now, your operating costs will be about 10 to 15% of the new delivery price of the boat. If you've got a racing yacht, it's likely to be double that. It's likely to be 8 to 10% of your annual operating costs. And the reason why is that generally speaking, racing yachts are a lower value than cruising yachts. And the racing premium is based on the new replacement cost of the mast bars, sails and running rigging. And that's a cost that increases on an ongoing basis. So very generally, you'll find your racing premium will be about the same as your cruising premium. And it's an expensive thing. But even still, it's not going to be much more. I mean, I'd be very surprised if anyone's insurance is more than 10% of the annual operating cost, if, of course, you're spending the right amount of money on maintenance. So in the bigger picture of things, insurance is actually a very cheap asset to have to protect what is quite a big asset to anybody who owns a yacht, no matter whether it's a small yacht or a large yacht, it's still a big asset to that person. So it's very, very important to do it right. And doing it right does cost a bit more money. And that's the same in anything in life. You know, if you want a decent bottle of wine, you're likely to pay a bit more money for it than you are a cheap bottle of wine. If you get a cheap bottle of wine, your hangover is going to be worse in the morning. And that's the same with a cheap insurance policy. Bob.
Well said.
Thank you, Colin. Just to introduce myself, Bob Vart. I think most of you know me. My background is in big ships, container ships, tankers, bulk carriers. and I've spent most of my career doing surveys and providing expert advice to parties in litigation regarding those sort of vessels. However, I've also sailed all my life. I've sailed since I was about 8, and I've raced since, I don't know, I can't remember, since I was in my teens. So I am a sailor, and I do yacht surveys also, as well as big boats. I'm finding in recent years that the size and value of recreational boats, yachts or motorboats, has increased exponentially. You know, when I was a young man, a 30-foot sailboat was considered to be a big yacht. Now that's a small yacht, and we're looking at 60-foot sailboats. We're looking at super yachts that start at 50 meters. You know, common definition of a super yacht is 50 meters and above. And yachts and motor cruisers are getting bigger and bigger, more expensive and more sophisticated. However, the standard of surveying and maintenance of these craft has not kept pace with the value. And we're now looking at boats that have very sophisticated systems on board. For example, automatic or semi-automatic fire extinguishing systems. And very often when I've been on board these boats, the crew, who probably are qualified to Hong Kong PVOL and no more, they just don't understand them. In fact, I've seen crew who are frightened of them and turn them off. We've got lots of other stuff. We've got loads of electronics now on board yachts and on board large pleasure vessels. We've got AIS, chart plotters, GPS, lots of radio equipment. All this is expensive kit, and there's not always people around who know how to operate it even. I found during my surveying that lightning strikes are a frequent cause of claims. Lightning strikes, of course, go for all these electronics. So you then stand to lose all your nice electronic toys, and then you need to make sure that your insurance policy is one that will cover you for that. I had a case a few years ago where there was a huge lightning storm in Port Shelter, and about 4 or 5 boats were struck by lightning. I did surveys on 2 of them. One of them was a almost new catamaran set up for ocean cruising, and the owner of that had lots of nice equipment, stereo. We had AIS. He had chart plotters. You name it. It was all set up for distance cruising. Zapped by lightning, all fried. I went along, did the survey for his insurance company, checked all the equipment that he claimed was fried, and it was. Put my report in, and he was reimbursed by his insurers. No problem, within weeks. Another boat, same storm, lightning strike, and this was a round the world yachtsman with an old double ender. He had quite a lot of electronic equipment on board, and he was sailing on a budget. He got zapped in the same storm, put his claim in. He'd taken on insurance with a name I won't mention, but a local company, and they sent a surveyor who had one look at the boat and said, it's connected to shore power. That means you will attract lightning. That means that you're not covered. And this poor guy had to fight a claim for months and months and months, and I believe in the end he gave up and he got nothing. My experience, there is no possible connection between being connected to shore power and being struck by lightning. But you get what you pay for. Maintenance. Normally, your insurance will cover you for your loss. But if you have not maintained your craft, then the insurance can and often will decline to pay. And the stuff you need to pay attention to that often is neglected because it doesn't make the boat go any faster. Standing rigging. Standing rigging, unless it's rods, has got a limited life. It's subject to internal corrosion, which you can't see because it's the wires on the inside of the lay that corrode first. And fatigue. The more tack you do, the more fatigue cycles that the standing rigging goes through. And you can't see what's going on. The safest option is every 10 or 15 years, change your standing rigging. I did a straw poll of rigging manufacturers not very long ago, a couple of years ago, and asked them what their recommendations were. And of course, they're trying to sell new rigging, so they're on the cautious side. But my conclusion at the end of it was standing rigging, change it after every 10 years if you're racing, changing after 15 years if you're cruising. That would be my advice. Seacocks. If a seacock blows out, you stand to have your boat sink. Okay, we all carry a little bag of wooden bungs, but does anyone know where they are in emergency? And it's actually not a situation you want to get into. You should check your seacocks every time your boat is hauled out for its annual refit. If there's any doubt about them, replace them. They're not expensive, but they can only be done when the boat's out of the water, obviously. Keel boats. Recent years, there's been a move amongst yacht designers, particularly racing yacht designers, to reduce the number of keel boats. I'm not sure why. I fear it may be driven by the accountants, but I've seen racing yachts held with the keel held to the hull by just 3 bolts, whereas historically you got about 12 or 15 or more bolts. Now sometimes you're down to 2 or 3, and these need to be checked carefully. Chain plates, similarly, where the shrouds attached to the hull, very important, very much neglected because they're often behind your furniture and your cupboards, etc. You need to get at them and check them, make sure they're not corroded, they're not coming off the fiberglass. And then gas systems. Fire is one of the biggest risks on any pleasure vessel. And most pleasure vessels have LP gas systems. This must have a solid brass pipe going from the gas cylinder through to the stove, and then the minimum length of flexible pipe. And the flexible pipe needs to be inspected regularly, make sure it's not perishing, and make sure that it can be isolated. Typhoons, we get a lot of typhoons in Hong Kong, and with global warming, we're expecting to get more. Your mooring lines have to be checked and have to be changed whenever they show any signs of chafing. For those who are on yacht club moorings, I would remind you that the yacht club's responsibility ends at the buoy. They will maintain the sinker, which is the bit on the bottom, the chain, and the buoy. After that, from the shackle all the way up to the boat, it's up to the owner to maintain it. Fire extinguishers, those need to be serviced. Everybody says they need to be serviced annually, and that is probably true. It's very difficult to get them serviced annually. Often the cheapest option is to just renew them. Life jackets, everyone on board must have a life jacket. And if you get an insurance surveyor coming around to check your boat for a renewal of insurance, he'll want to see all the life jackets, all the fire extinguishers, the flares, and all the other safety equipment. Final point I wanted to make was collisions. Apart from fire, collisions are a reasonably common source of damage, particularly to racing boats. If you have a collision, you need to report it to MARDEP. It's a legal requirement if there's any injury or significant damage. A lot of owners think that you also can get a ruling on who's to blame for the collision and who's to pay from a protest committee. Not true. HKSF are quite specific that any ruling of a protest committee is not to be used in an insurance claim.
That's a very good point, actually, because when we had a collision a few years ago, there was no significant damage that we could see, and
Right.
there's no significant injury. So in the requirements by MARDEP, it was not required to be reported.
Correct.
But then when we went to make the insurance claim, the insurer said, did you file a police report? And we said no, because it's not required. But they basically asked us to file a police report. So we did. So
Yeah.
maybe if you,
Yeah.
basically it would be better to err on the side of caution
Sure.
to
Yeah.
do that.
MARDEP have a form, just report it. They won't do anything about it, but yeah, it's then reportable.
So a few points to pick up on what you said, just to
Sure.
back up what you're saying. But
Yeah,
insurance is there to cover you for an unforeseeable event. So if, for example, a typhoon is approaching and you've done nothing to protect your yacht, if you've not replaced your rigging on a regular basis, if you've not got your fire extinguishing system, etc., up to date, if it's possible that you could foresee loss, underwriters are going to have a problem with it. It's there to cover a mistake and a problem and something that is unexpected. In actual fact, we are seeing some underwriters now not insuring yachts that have got rigging older than 10 years. They're requiring it to be replaced after 10 years. They may be flexible for another couple of years with an inspection, but not really. I would always recommend an owner to build a survey cost into his maintenance program and have a full, effectively a pre-purchase survey done every 3 years. It's far easier and far cheaper and far simpler to solve a problem on the hard standing and discover it 100 miles offshore. A survey is not massively expensive, and to have one every 2 to 3 years, build it into your maintenance costs, and that's going to save you a lot of grief. A very big problem we have in Hong Kong are illegal moorings. I put money on the table that both the Marine Department and the insurance industry are going to really clamp down on illegal moorings in the coming months and years. I know that Hong Kong has a desperate shortage of moorings, and there are people who rent private moorings from people, and they're told this is perfectly fine. It's a private mooring. I don't need a license. That's completely wrong. You must have a license issued by the Marine Department that's clearly, the number is clearly written on the mooring. If it's not, it's an illegal mooring, and insurers can reserve the right not to pay a claim if you're breaking the law. Excuse me. The other last point I'll make on the points you made, Bob, was about crew, and every yacht must be seaworthy. And if a yacht is not seaworthy, an underwriter is able to deny a claim. And seaworthiness is not just the physical condition of a boat, it includes the capability of a crew. Capability of the crew includes experience at handling a similar vessel, not just pieces of paper. I had an incident 2 years ago, excuse me, incident 2 years ago, two people independently happened to be buying two speedboats at the same time. And they both had their masters and engineers certificates, and neither of them had ever set foot on a boat in their lives before. And they were buying 25-foot speedboats to take their wives and young kids out for the weekend to go to a picnic on a beach and things like that. And they did not want to have somebody on board who had experience in operating a boat like that. So they went to somebody else for the insurance because that other person didn't raise the question. I was shocked, frankly, that these people would take their wife and kids out on a boat into the Lama Channel when they had never, ever been on a boat in their lives before. But nonetheless, that's what they wanted to do. That boat would not have been seaworthy. It's as simple as that, because the people on board were not experienced in operating that vessel. I mean, it was just a few points on the points.
And actually for seaworthy, so in the claim that we did also, one of the insureds, they had like a list of things that they were checking for seaworthiness.
Yeah.
And one of them was paper charts. Now we have a paper chart on board, but that was a simple thing. If you didn't have a paper chart, they could look at that.
Well, paper charts are much more accurate than electronic charts. In that, we had an incident in Singapore a few years ago where a motorboat hit a sandbank, and paper charts chart where sandbanks move. Electronic charts tend not to do that, or they didn't in those days. And so, yeah, so it's very important to have paper charts. And also at the same time, what happens if you get hit by lightning and all your electronics get blown out? You don't want to be left with no charts on board. So, it's an awful lot of this is common sense. And unfortunately, a lot of it comes down to reluctance of owners to spend money on maintaining a boat. And that's unfortunately, we see that through and through. I will say, and I'm not just saying it because we're talking to a bunch of sailors here, I will say, though, that sailing boat owners are much, much more risk aware than motorboat owners. And we do generally see much more careful attention to maintenance and risk management from sailing boat owners than we do motorboat owners. And I think that's probably because sailing is a hobby and a passion, whereas a motorboat is generally a toy that is used as and when. I think that's probably the classic difference.
So we'd like to open the discussion to any questions that the audience have. I also have a list of questions on my own. So if anyone has a question, speak up, or we will continue the conversation. Does anybody out there have a question? You were mentioning moorings.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to Colin on that. I'm aware, Colin, that in a part of the New Territories where I live, which is the northeast, there are a lot of boats which are anchored, and I have found that these boats are actually have laid anchors that are designed for large fishing vessels, and these are really big anchors, and they pay someone to lay the anchor, and they attach it to some sort of buoy, and then they attach their pleasure vessel, be it a yacht or a powerboat, to the buoy. And then they say to Marine Department, no, it's not an illegal mooring, it's anchored. Now, my question to you, Colin, is how would an underwriter look at this in a typhoon situation?
I think that the simplest answer I'll give is if you try to cut corners, you're going to get found out at some stage.
Yeah.
And people try to do this the whole time, and they what goes around comes around, really. Yeah. And there are lots of illegal moorings, and the long and short of it is, if your mooring buoy does not have a license number on it, it is illegal.
Yeah.
Now the boat owner can say no, but I'm an anchor. And then why on earth is he tying himself to a buoy?
They put the dinghy on it, and that's the mooring buoy.
What's he trying to achieve here? At the end of the day, what's he trying to achieve? And if he's intentionally putting his boat at risk by having an anchor that he can't control, basically, which is what you're saying, then he's not likely to get paid out by his insurance company because he's intentionally putting his boat at risk.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense. And the problem does arise through a chronic shortage of proper marina facilities in Hong Kong.
Correct.
And this is something that the Marine Department is going to have to address. Yeah. And I believe there was a meeting yesterday with the Marine Department, the Marine Police, and the Fire Department to talk about this problem, and particularly with Aberdeen in mind. So I think we may see some changes. Yeah. I think it's unfortunate, frankly, that the Marine Department opened up Hailing Chow and simply said, there you go, guys, there's 600 moorings. You've got 600 moorings in a typhoon shelter, yes, but there's no facilities, there's no safety, there's no security, there's no way of getting to and from the place. Yeah. I mean, it's a joke. And the answer I got from the Marine Department when I spoke to them about this was, you see. when yachts are there, all these facilities will come. Well, they might, but it might be too late by that stage.
But as you say, there's no ferry to Hailing Chapel.
No, there are people who are purporting to lay on this VIP concierge service to Hailing Chow,
Right.
but I think we'll see
price.
that if it, we'll see that if
Yeah.
it happens. Frankly.
One more addition to the moorings
Yeah.
was, I know in the yacht club, we've often mentioned stainless steel versus cast iron.
Yeah.
And so are there, typhoon season's approaching, are there any other things we should be reminding boat owners to be aware of for taking off the
Let me
standing sails?
just correct you, Paul,
Yeah.
on that. It's not cast iron,
Mm.
mild steel.
Okay, yeah.
Galvanized mild steel is the strongest
Mhm.
for the shackles and the swivels and the chain.
Mm.
Stainless steel shackles, stainless steel swivels, even stainless steel chain. They look very pretty, but they're only about 80% as strong as mild steel.
Mm.
So they'll break. That's all really.
Oh,
So if you want to go for stainless steel, you have to go up a size, get a bigger one.
You got to look at your mooring lines.
Yeah.
You've got to look at your anti-chaffing
Mhm. Yeah.
equipment you got on a boat. Quite often we see hose pipe put over mooring lines and that hose pipe slips, so you
Right,
still
yeah.
got a problem. You want to secure your mooring lines not just on the bow, but to other strong points on the boat. And I would suggest not to do this to your mast if it's a deck step mast. If it's a keel step mast, then obviously it's a good idea, but not on a deck step mast.
Deck step mast, you go to the winches.
At the end of the day, if you've done everything possible to reduce the chance of a loss, underwriters are going to be sympathetic. I had a Typhoon Hato, one client said to me, "How on earth can you expect me to go out to my boat today? I'm terribly busy at work." And I said, well, the same way that a client I know who's got his boat quite close to yours, who's in England at the moment, has made a phone call to somebody else to go to his boat to sort it out for him. And it all depends on the attitude of the client, the boat owner, to his risk. And he's done everything possible to minimize the risk, is going to get sympathy.
You said this the other day, we were chatting about how the relationship is really with the owner and the underwriter, and the more communication there is and the more transparency there is, then there's a higher likelihood of getting paid on a claim. But when there's no transparency and no communication, then you're kind of asking for trouble.
Yeah, I mean, it's a contract. Insurance is a legal contract. And I kind of say to people who complain when underwriters are asking too many questions or want this or want that, you expect the underwriter to abide by his side of the contract. So it is therefore not unreasonable for the underwriter to expect the boat owner to abide by his side of the contract. And a contract is an agreement between two parties or more. But you're absolutely right. The transparency, if there's any question about it, talk to your broker, ask your broker. It's so important to have a broker who knows what he's talking about when it comes to yachts with yacht insurance. There are many, many people who provide yacht insurance. But if you've got a question, ask your broker. And if your broker can't answer, your broker will find somebody who can and they'll help you out. But invariably, your broker should be able to answer most questions.
So here's the first question: is we've been hearing a lot of news of underwriters that are ending or reducing racing coverage, and also underwriters that are not, or just are not agreeing to underwrite in Hong Kong region or in Asia. Can you talk to that a bit?
Well, racing has always been a big risk, and that's why premiums are paid for it. And interestingly enough, premiums for racing risks haven't actually changed much. They've all historically been 1.5% to 2% of the new replacement cost of the mast bar sales and running rig, depending on what racing you're doing, and the value of that. And that's not actually changed much in 20 years, to be quite frank. The difficulty of racing, we all know the challenges of racing. A boat is under a lot more stress when it's racing. The crew is under a lot more stress when it's racing, and all the equipment on board is used to its maximum. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a successful racing yacht. That does mean things break. People push their boats to the maximum when they're racing, and things break when that happens. So the risk is that much greater. Unfortunately, what we've seen in recent years, the last couple of years, is rather than underwriters adapt to the risk concerns and amend cover and amend terms to fit the risk, They've just walked away from it. And the reason they're doing that is simply that even if they triple the premiums, they're not going to get their money back on the losses that have been paid out. So if you look at the losses incurred in the Aberdeen fire the other week, for example, it's probably, I don't know, 6 to 8 to 9 million US dollars of claims in that Aberdeen fire the other week. And underwriters are not going to recoup that money. The annual insurance premium in Hong Kong is probably 10 million US dollars, right? So it's not, they're not likely to make their money back. So they're just cutting their losses and running. So that's where the difficulty lies. And unfortunately, if it carries on the way it's carrying on, we're going to see people just not be able to get insurance for racing risks, and that's not something we want to see. So what I'm trying to do is work with the insurance industry and in turn with the yacht owning community to try and find a common ground that allows underwriters to underwrite the risk, but at the same time, owners of boats need to take more responsibility on board to make it more of a palatable risk for insurers.
You also mentioned the other day when we were speaking about like boat owners who were shopping around and basically just going to the lowest cost, offer all the time and not really showing loyalty and what that kind of contributes to the environment for the underwriter.
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem with Hong Kong and Asia more so than most other parts of the world. I mean, it's not unique to Asia, but we're seeing difficulty with older boats, lower valued boats. Underwriters just simply aren't interested in underwriting the risk, and they know the owner is going to shop around year after year after year. And why should they pay? Why should they accept a risk that they're not going to get much premium for? And I think it needs to be remembered that if you have a claim, it's not just your repair costs the underwriters pay. Underwriters pay surveyors fees, they'll pay wreck removal costs. So there's a lot more cost on top. It's probably 20 to 30% on top of the claim that underwriters pay on top of that. And so I think it's important to understand that the risks underwriters bear are very different from just the premium that's paid. And if you've got somebody who is going to shop around every year and move every year for $10 cheaper here, $10 cheaper there, the underwriters can say, well, I'm not going to put the effort into this. I don't need this type of stuff. It's just not profitable for us.
So that was actually the first question, is the age of the yacht ever an issue? And I think the answer is,
well, the answer is very much yes, and it's an answer that I don't agree with. I fully believe that the age of a yacht shouldn't have anything to do with it. If you've got a survey, the boat's in good condition, it's got a good maintenance program, you've got good crew. If it's a boat of a size to have paid crew, I personally think an underwriter should look at it as if it's a boat of the condition the survey puts it in. The challenge is an older boat generally is a much lower value, and the insurance policies from a good quality insurer, an insurance policy will replace new for old. So, so say for example your mast goes, for example, they'll replace you with a brand new mast. Now that can be 5 or 6 times value of an ancient boat nowadays, right? So underwriters, so the risk of underwriters paying a very disproportionate claim is much higher with an older boat. But yes, it is a factor that all insurers bring into play, and frankly, I disagree with that.
The next question is, can you also repeat the cost of proper insurance? I believe I heard 4 to 5% of operating costs, so that would be about 0.4 to 0.7% of the new price of a cruising yacht.
So if you've got a super yacht, and I'm talking a yacht, say over 30 meters, over 10 million US dollars in value, your operating cost is going to be, your insurance premium on an annual basis is likely to be 0.3 to 0.4% of the value. If you've got a yacht, a more normal kind of sized yacht, I suppose, say between $500,000 US and $3 or $4 million US dollars, your premium now is going to be 0.5, 0.4 to 0.8%, depending on what you're doing with the boat. And anything sort of up to $1.5 million, $2 million US dollars, you're going to be paying around about 0.8 to 1% of the value of a boat. Yeah.
Okay. The next question: can you clarify seaworthy crew when we have contact with damaged edge racing.
I would like to, if I can, ask two questions directly, Paul.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead, Leslie.
They're both to do with the fact that I'm a national judge and often in protest committees. And many people, as you've mentioned earlier, come to the protest committee to try and get them to decide whose fault it was. So I have two separate questions really for you, Colin. One is, what do the insurance companies take notice of? Do they look at the protest? Do they look at the racing rules of sailing, or do they look at the col regs when they are deciding who's at fault? And added to that, there's another question regarding fault. Do they look at the seaworthiness of the crew, which you mentioned with the powerboats earlier? Do they say this crew is competent and this crew is not competent? They're two separate questions.
So the answer to the second question is easier. It's just a simple yes, they do. They look at all the crew on board and their competency, and they bring that into the equation. The answer to your first question is a bit more complicated. Yes, they look at col regs. There is no such thing legally now as 100% to blame in terms of collision. It can be 99% to 1%, but it's nonetheless, it's never 100% nowadays. I hear what is said about the protest committees and about their results not having a bearing on insurance, but frankly, I think that's utterly bizarre. You've got a professional body of people who are giving a professional known opinion as to whose fault it was to cause a problem. How on earth should insurers not take that into account? I think it's utterly bizarre for people to think that insurers shouldn't take that into account. It's absolutely ridiculous. And what is the point of having a protest if you're not going to stand by the decision of the protest committee at the end of the day? I hear what the Sailing Federation says, but I think it's bonkers.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is my yacht is on a marred up mooring. However, one thing I lose sleep over is the marred up mooring itself. Is there any view of insurance cover if a marred up mooring fails?
If a marred up mooring fails, you've got to have the joy of suing the Marine Department. But I think certainly if you're a marred up mooring that is run by the yacht clubs, you'll find that those are inspected very, very regularly, very thoroughly, and maintained to a very, very high standard. I think if you are in the slightest bit worried about the mooring you've got, simply get a professional person to come and do a mooring inspection, and pay a diver who knows what he's doing to go and do it. And I mean, I know Alex Johnson, for example, he spends quite a lot of time diving on the ABC moorings and checking this and checking that. And I'm sure for a small fee, he'll be happy to help out. So if you're worried about it, get it checked out. Don't lie awake at night.
The questioner also mentions that he's seen Aberdeen moorings float off before.
Yeah.
So, there you go.
But Aberdeen doesn't necessarily mean Aberdeen Boat Club.
Right,
there are
right.
lots of government moorings in Aberdeen Typhoon Shelter, and there are lots of illegal moorings in the Aberdeen Typhoon Shelter.
Right. Okay, the next question is, what are the implications of sailing across borders or offshore sailing?
Insurance implications. Well, so long as you're complying with your flag state requirements and the local laws of where you are, it's not a problem. As long as your insurers are aware of what you're doing, of course, and you've got to be properly crewed. This whole issue of shorthand sailing offshore, again, it's a safety issue. I remember having an argument with a couple who'd done a lot of miles offshore, just the two of them with their two young children. And he was a big burly fellow. They were all good sailors. Well, the husband and wife were good sailors. He was a big burly fellow, and his wife was quite a slight lady. And I was trying to explain to them that there's nothing to do with the ability to sail. If he falls over the side of the boat, can she get the boat under control? Can she look after the kids? And can she turn the boat around and pick him up? The answer is plainly no. And that's the point of being crewed properly when you go offshore. You've got to be able to control the vessel and have a safe voyage. So yeah, that's really important.
I would guess that most policies also specify, because I know in ours it specifies, I think we're like 250 nautical miles or something, that it has to be within that area.
Yeah, I mean, again, when you set your insurance policy up at the beginning, you discuss what your needs are going to be for the year. So most insurance policies in Hong Kong will have a standard 200 150 miles. Some are just within Hong Kong waters. But quite often with yacht club members on the bigger boats, it might include one return trip to the Philippines in the year or further afield. But it's obviously very important to discuss that with the insurers when you set the policy up. I would say it's better to do it when you set the policy up than trying to add it on later. It's likely to be an easier discussion, and it's likely to be slightly cheaper on your additional costs of insurance to do it at the beginning.
We had talked earlier, like for every 200 boats or so, there may be 10 to 15 claims a year, about something like that, right? And you also mentioned a lot of those claims end up being fire. I had no idea that fire was such a big portion of claims.
Yeah, I mean, and until Clearwater Bay and the old Kai Tak, Kontong, and Aberdeen, the biggest portion of claims were lightning strikes. The problem with things like the fires we've seen is if one boat goes up, you're going to get the whole load go up, and you've got a big risk in the same place, and that's a problem for insurers. They can handle risks where they're dotted around the place, but when you've got a whole row of boats going up, it's a problem for insurers. But yeah, fire has become an increasing problem. I think in the super yacht world, over the last 2 or 3 years, there's probably an average of one every month, one every 6 weeks destroyed by fire somewhere in the world. Obviously, there are going to be some that are suspicious, but I think on the whole, they're not suspicious fires. But without knowledge, reading between the lines and reading the reports I've read, I think quite a lot of it comes down to owners saving money on maintenance costs, saving money on crew quality, which leads to mistakes and problems.
I would put in there that that the crew with these sophisticated super yachts, the crew don't understand them, and I have experience of one where the crew had deliberately disabled the fixed firefighting system.
I think
because they were frightened of it and they didn't.
I think this is more of a problem in Asia than elsewhere, and what we see in Asia is owners take their boat out of class because it's private, not charter. You don't have to have your boat class to be charter, to be private, sorry, and it costs money to keep your boat in class a year, and owners don't want to spend the money.
Correct.
I saw a 50-meter boat 5 or 6 years ago come out of class and fire its qualified chief engineer and hired not only somebody who was unqualified, but he'd failed his exams 3 times. And this is on a 50-meter yacht, $30 million boat.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this in Asia an awful lot. And we're seeing owners go very cheap on crew, and they're not doing anything to increase the standards of their crew. They're not paying for crew. And this is a generalization, of course. There's not everybody.
No, you're absolutely right.
But they're not paying for crew to go and be trained. And they're not standing up to MCA standards, they're not standing up to classification standards, and it will end in a very big problem. It's just a question of when.
But at the moment, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems that insurers are accepting Hong Kong PVOL as sufficient qualification to drive a super yacht, which is probably 30 tons and are capable of doing 30 knots.
Insurers say
big lump of boat.
Insurers say you comply with the law and you comply with your flag state requirements, and your boat must be seaworthy. Now, the first 2 pieces of paper, easy. The second one, that's up to the owner to make sure his boat's seaworthy, and that includes the crew competence that we talked about.
I asked this because I had occasion to as a surveyor, to go out on sea trials on a super yacht that was being sold in Hong Kong to a foreign buyer, and the coxswain, who'd been on the boat for many, many years, very nice guy, his qualification was a PVOL grade, because the boat was, I think, 30 meters, and we took it out into the Lama Channel and cranked it up, and checking on the speed for the buyer. I was appointed by the buyer, and very happily the boat did 30 knots. So I'm thinking, we've got this Mr. Chan who's got his PVOL license. He's driving this boat. It could do a lot of damage if we hit someone with this big boat at 30 knots. And to my mind, as a big boat surveyor and a commercial vessel surveyor. I didn't think that was sufficient qualification,
I think there's two things for that.
but it's on paper, it is.
Yeah, I think there's two things for that. Number one, boat owners generally are very loyal to their crew, particularly
Yeah.
Hong Kong Chinese, very loyal to their crew.
Yeah.
And they've started life with a 40-foot boat. They now have a 120-foot boat.
Yeah.
They've got the same guy running it.
Yes.
And he's increased his Hong Kong tickets, but hasn't necessarily gone abroad to do MCA and this kind of stuff.
No.
I think the second thing that comes out of your comment is the huge difficulty of importing proper qualified crew. And this
Yeah.
is an immigration problem in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Now, to bring this back to racing yachts and sailing yachts,
Yeah.
we have a huge problem where Philippine crew are hired as domestic staff and they're working on boats.
Yeah.
Now, that's just going to cause, if somebody gets injured, that's going to cause no end of problems for the employer
Yeah.
and the Filipino crew member.
Yeah.
And that's not a good thing. But the difficulty is the immigration department say there's plenty of unemployed fishermen, they can sail boats. And of course, we know necessarily that's not necessarily the case,
No.
but it's an immigration difficulty in Hong Kong of allowing properly qualified crew in.
Agree.
There's another question. In the ABC incident, how does the accommodation risk would affect the coverage and the other boats nearby?
You mean a liveaboard?
Liveaboard.
Well, it's simple. Liveaboard boats are illegal in Hong Kong, full stop. And if underwriters decide they want to look at the liveaboard boats that were lost, they're well within their rights not to pay a claim. But I think if you look at the cause of the fire, excuse me, the current thinking is it was a liveaboard boat that had a big party. The party finished, the barbecue was left unattended, and hot ashes coals blew off that barbecue onto the boat next door, which had a full-length cover on it, and it was that cover that caught fire. And then that's how the whole thing started.
And you had another comment about the cover that had the cover
Well,
catch fire.
yeah, I mean, I think 2020 hindsight on that, but I mean, I think one turns around and says, why wasn't that cover treated with fire retardant, fire retardant material?
It's
So
not required to be.
it's not required to be, but risk management, maybe it's something that should be required. But I think that's all things that are going to be looked into in the coming weeks. But long and short of it is liveaboard boats are illegal. And I think we'll find the Marine Department cracking down a lot on those illegal liveaboard boats, even though per se, the fact the boat was a liveaboard wasn't necessarily the cause of the problem. But yeah.
We have a little bit more time, so if anyone has questions, please speak up or put into the chat. We didn't actually get the chance to talk about brokers versus agents, and maybe you can comment on that.
So there's three elements really to insurance. One is the underwriter, and the underwriter is the person that takes the risk, and that is the person with whom a boat owner has his contract of insurance. The contract of insurance is between the owner and the underwriter. There are two people that arrange insurance for an owner. One is an agent and one is a broker. An agent represents the insurer or the underwriter. And in Hong Kong, you're allowed to represent, I think it's 4 different underwriters, but the agent works for the underwriter and sells the underwriter's policy. He is not legally required to help an owner when it comes to a claim. A broker is completely independent and approaches any underwriters he sees fit for his client's insurance. And generally speaking, he should, depending on the risk, he should be able to provide 3-4 quotes for discussion. Quite often I find I'll get 5 or 6 quotes, and quite often 2 way ahead of the others. So it's a no-brainer to look at 2, not all 5. The challenge in Hong Kong is where we have brokers who have facilities with underwriters, because there's a big conflict of interest there, where they have a facility into which the insurance cover goes. Those brokers will receive a profit commission from the underwriter on the basis of there being no claims or few claims. So if they call themselves a broker and acting in the best interests of their client, i.e. the boat owner, and yet it's in their interest there to be no claims or claims not to be very much, then I think there's plainly a conflict there. And I think we've got to question the validity of quite a lot of the business that goes into these facilities and on what basis that's being done, and do the underwriters actually know really what business is going under that facility. And it may be the time comes when it just implodes and all of a sudden it's exposed, there's all sorts of nasty things there and it goes very nastily wrong. But obviously my recommendation, I'm totally biased, is that you should always use a broker who knows what he's talking about for your insurance. And your best interests are in doing that, frankly.
Leslie also asks, so all live aboard boats are illegal in Hong Kong?
Yes.
Okay, so also that was also one of the reasons for the DB closure of the north?
Discovery Bay kind of used that as an excuse, but really they've been looking to redevelop for 4 or 5 years and put the plans in and redo it. And frankly speaking, you know, the money that that property developer can earn from having 24 super yachts in there is infinitely more than you can from having 200 small yachts.
And I'd like to come in on that actually, just as maybe as a parting anecdote. The boats that were evicted from Discovery Bay about 18 months ago, I believe, a number of them ended up in Kwun Tong Typhoon Shelter. And about a year ago, perhaps less, there was a fire involving 3 of them in Kwun Tong Typhoon Shelter. Very suspiciously, one of the owners was on board one of the boats about an hour before the fire started. There was a lot of talk, a lot of suspicion about the possibility that it was arson. I dispatched 2 of my colleagues to go and investigate this after we'd been instructed by a bank that held the mortgage on 2 of the boats. And there was a lot of very experienced and well-qualified surveyors turned up at Kwun Tong Typhoon Shelter when a contractor with a crane barge pulled the 3 boats from the bottom of the typhoon shelter where the fire service departments had put them to put the fire out. They'd filled them with water, they sank, fire out, job done. The 3 boats were pulled up and put on the hard standing at Kwun Tong, and an army of surveyors went over them with a tooth comb. And every one of them really had in their mind, this could be arson. However, there was no physical evidence whatsoever. The boats had been burnt out and then sunk. And there was no evidence that anyone could find of arson. Therefore, my understanding is underwriters paid out. My client, the bank, was very happy. They didn't have any liability, and that was the end of the matter. But there we are. You know, fire is an insured peril, but as Colin will no doubt back me up, it's only an insured peril as long as all your fire extinguishers, all your systems, and everything is in order.
Yeah, no, that's not true. I mean, I think just on that point, it's worth noting that there are 2 basic types of insurance for yachts. One is all risks, and the other one is named perils. So the Institute Yacht clauses are your traditional named perils clauses. They were written, they were published in 1985.
Right.
They're very old clauses.
Yeah.
They're much more suitable for sailing yachts than motor yachts, although if you amend them heavily, you can get them to be pretty good, really pretty good. But the primary difference is that with a named perils policy, it's up to the boat owner to prove he has a loss under his policy.
Yeah.
With an all risks policy, which are generally wordings that are written in more modern times, they're more plain English language. They're generally individual policies set up by the companies themselves. An all risks policy, which includes the American Yacht Form R12, which is nothing to do with America, by the way, just to confuse. But the all risks policy, it is up to the insurer to prove that it is not a claim under the policy if they choose to deny a claim.
So the onus of proof shifts to the underwriter.
That's right, and that obviously gives the owner of the boat a much better thing to go on.
Okay, that's interesting.
Are there any races, we're coming to a close now, but I want to keep going if people have questions. Are there any races that can be joined that do not need specific racing risks insurance?
No, a race is a race. If you're under starters orders, you're racing.
Okay.
And we have races in Hong Kong, like the lunchtime things, the ABC doing whatever. There are some covers, Zurich Insurance, for example, will include social racing for no additional premiums and things. But you've got to be quite clear what you're doing with the underwriter. And I think to avoid grey areas, disclose what racing you're going to do with that. The social races, but offshore, if you're under starters orders, you're racing. It's as simple as that. But the races that the ABC does, for example, to the restaurant races, are more of a rally than a race. But there's a competitive edge. But technically speaking, if you're under starters orders, you're racing, and you do need to disclose it. But some underwriters will be more lenient than others. So that's it. It does differ.
So I have a question for you, Colin. What if you're on your way to the start line and you get a gust and your rig comes down?
You're not racing.
So you get full cover. You're not 50%.
Well, subject to your deductible.
Subject
But
to one of those.
If you're in the 10-minute gun, if you're under starters orders, you're racing.
Right. Okay. But if you're on your way to the start line or on your way back from the finish,
you're not racing.
you've got full cover.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, one last question for you, Bob, is what are I mean, we've already mentioned a lot of maintenance issues and the regular maintenance, and Colin has also mentioned, trying to work in things like the survey into the regular maintenance. But what are some? Can you give us a list of some big issues that have come up? And off the top of my head, I mean, we've had the last couple of years we've had keels come off on definitely on ocean racing and people die. We've had rudders fall off out of the boat and boats sink. I mean, this has happened numerous times, even here in Hong Kong waters. Of course, the fires, anything, even for our own boat, there's a gasket in the sail drive, and I believe you're supposed to replace that every 5 years or so. And so there was a boat 1 or 2 years ago where that failed, and they almost lost that boat. So anything else that you can think of?
It's not possible to give you a complete off-the-cuff list. To do a full survey of a large yacht, it's a full day's work, and it needs an experienced surveyor, and he will have either in his head or in his notebook a checklist of things to look at. And basically, he's going to be looking for anything that could cause if he's working for on behalf of an insurance company or on behalf of an owner who wants to seek insurance, he's got in his mind, or should have, what on the boat can give rise to a significant claim against the underwriters. So this really could be anything, something as simple as the companionway steps are loose, and a crew member could fall down and be injured.
And that's why I suggest that an owner should look to build into his maintenance program a pre-purchase survey, which is looking for every single thing possible wrong on a boat, not just an insurance survey.
I would call it a condition survey, Colin.
Well, they're different. So a pre-purchase survey is looking for every nook and cranny and scratch.
Right.
An insurance condition survey is looking for seaworthiness issues.
Right.
So a pre-purchase survey is way more invasive and intensive than a condition survey for insurance. And the reason I'm saying that is is doing it for the owner. Right. It's in the owner's best interests to know everything about his boat, and then the owner can decide what he wants to do. Most surveyors on both types of surveys will code their recommendations, either in 3 steps or 5 steps, and going from to be done when the boat's next refitted to when it's next out of the water annually, right up to before this boat moves, this must happen type thing. And normally insurers should, if the broker asks them, should allow an owner to do the recommendations within the surveyor's time frame. Many insurers who are not asked this, or slightly not as knowledgeable, will put a warranty on a policy that all recommendations must be complied with. And that to me is a bit ridiculous, because if a surveyor recommends that the scratch in the hull is buffed out at the next haul out, that's nothing to do with seaworthiness, but it's a recommendation. And the insurer puts a warranty on it. Now, a warranty means it absolutely must be complied with. And if there's a loss that happens that's not connected to that scratch, for example, the underwriters can still deny the claim if it's a warranty.
Right.
If it's a subjectivity, the loss must relate to the incident. You know what I mean? To the subjectivity.
Yeah, I get the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's yes, it costs a bit of money, but I do believe it's in an owner's best interests every 3 years or so to have a
full
really
survey.
full pre-purchase survey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about many COA events? Are they races?
Any who what?
COA,
Cruising.
cruising as owners,
Yeah, they're right. If you're
under
on-
starters rules. then.
If you're under starters orders, you're racing. Yeah.
Okay.
If you're cruising in company, you're not racing.
Okay, I think that was pretty good. Thank you, Colin, and thank you,
Pleasure.
Bob. If anyone has any last minute questions, you have about 30 seconds here. We are going to the Big Boat Committee. We are trying to start a monthly series, and every month we'll be talking about a different issue. I think the next up will be maintenance again. And we're also thinking about engine maintenance and many different topics. You know, Hebe has had a great series that we are looking to as an example in terms of yacht racing. But basically, the intention will be every month, and we're going to try to do it like the first week of the month, and maybe have a specific day so everyone will remember. It'll be easy to remember. We're going to try to do this. So if anyone has any recommendations or wants to volunteer to help, you know, be a speaker, please contact us. Either through the Facebook group, we have over 700 members there in the Big Boats group, or directly through the Yacht Club, or if you know any of us, you can message us directly as well. So
Great.
thanks very much.
Thank you.
Colin, thank you very much, Bob.
Thanks, Paul.
And thank you, Elsa and Iris in the sailing office who have helped us set everything up and are monitoring as we speak. Who are the usual suspects for underwriters who insure sailboats?
Drop me an email.
Actually, I don't know if our emails are in there. Do you want to mention your email, or you have a website also?
Yeah, I mean, my email is simple. It's colindawson@tgg.com.hk. So drop me an email or give me a call, 94245222, if you want to have a chat.
He's also on LinkedIn, so the LinkedIn link is in the bio on the there. And for Bob, your bio was also in the link on the Facebook group at least. And I bet your number.
Yeah,
and
I
email
mean,
there too.
I have a boat in the big boat class, so
Right,
you can
yeah.
contact me through the big boat class.
Right,
Anybody
okay.
wishes to.
Okay, very
Cool.
good.
Great.
Thanks.
Paul, thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Okay, great.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.